Hi everyone, Sandman here. Today's video is brought to you by a donation from Mike, and here's what he has to say. Hi Sandman, I've been watching your videos for a while now, and I want to thank you for introducing me to MGTOW and the way of thinking and converting me into a true MGTOW, just like you. And just like you, I've luckily been through a lot of failed relationships, and I now see women completely differently. I hope you'll recover soon, and please accept my donation as a thank you for sharing your videos and wisdom to the world. P.S. Regards. Well, Mike, thanks for your donation, and I've decided to shorten your message to me and dedicate this video to you. So I'm sure that you, as well as everyone else out there, is wondering why the topic for this video is female nature. After all, isn't almost every single one of my videos about the same thing? So isn't it a little bit redundant to call this video female nature? And the answer is that I want to discuss one particular aspect of female nature that really bothers me. The part about women dealing specifically with men. When you're with a woman and you start calling her out on her female nature and her stereotypical behaviors and actions, most women will not admit or respond to it. You can call it choosing not to answer your questions on their part, or it's plausible deniability, or even a lack of agency, or all of the above. But I think it's far more than any of that. I think women are great at the game of human poker, because they're amazing at bluffing their way through life. I've met many women that pretended to be the most interesting women in the world. They would talk about all the great places that they've traveled. They would try to do their makeup in bright and colorful ways, and they would always try to portray themselves as living an awesome lifestyle. They would speak about going to fancy restaurants and sporting events, even when they had no interest in the sport whatsoever. It seems that this is the day and age where women want the rest of the world to see their lives as unique, exciting, and one of a kind. They speak about being authentic to oneself and feeling their way through life. And so much of female nature is women feeling their way through the world, and initially feeling their way into relationships, but quickly sobering up and thinking through their relationships instead. And on the other side, so much of male nature is men thinking through the physical world and feeling our way through both our romantic and platonic relationships. If any guy rubs us the wrong way, we often get hostile, jealous, and angry. And when most blue pill men meet a woman that they're attracted to, then they basically feel their way into the relationship instead of thinking their way into it instead. And the mantras of do what feels right and chasing an emotional high are what often get men into trouble. I think that if blue pill men started looking at relationships as more of a business transaction and less of an emotional drug or high, then we would be living in a much different society. We already know that most women feel their way into and out of relationships, but men have only been encouraged to do the same in the last 100 years. I believe that men used to marry not for love, but instead for companionship and family, and they married women that were a far better fit for them than the women today. There was no pop culture promoting the idea that men fall romantically in love with women until the mid-19th century, when romantic love was pushed on men. That also seems to be when men were expected to write long poetic love letters to women so we can inflame their emotions. So I guess you can partially blame romantic love letters on the creation of the post office. And I remember sending love letters and postcards back in the late 90s when long-distance calls were expensive and when I didn't really have access to ICQ and email because where I was staying didn't always seem to have the internet. And with regards to popular culture, I think that the only way that blue pill men will not focus on the emotional highs of relationships and love is if the cheesy movies, TV shows, and other cultural artifacts encouraging us to do so begin to vanish. But enough about male nature. I think that as a society we need to see women as poker players bluffing their way through life. And a long time ago I spoke to a woman about why she kept secrets from her husband of 10 years. And she told me it's more interesting to live life with a little bit of mystery in it. And that's when I realized that women generally operate on a need-to-know basis. And even if you ask them to answer an important question, they often deflect and avoid you, and just hope that you stop asking that question and change the topic of the discussion to something else. I would no doubt still be in a relationship today if my ex-partner of almost 10 years had actually talked out our problems instead of ignoring everything I brought up, and just hoped that I would stop asking. And it wasn't until I was done with the relationship did she actually start to communicate with me. It was the 10th inning, but the game was over in the 9th. And we often talk about how women are the ones that initiate divorces and breakups, but I think that most women don't expect to be dumped. It's not in their nature. As a woman, the entire world is telling you that you're the better sex, and that the only thing that men can think about is sex. But then one day when you're in a relationship with a guy and he starts talking to you about wanting something more than sex, you simply don't know how to respond. Because after all, women are the ones that plan a couple's life out. How they'll live, what parties they go to, and what relatives they see on weekends. Once a guy tries to put his own 2 cents into the situation, most women don't know how to respond because they've never actually read articles in Cosmo magazine that teach them that men are human beings too, and also have unique desires in life. It must be shocking when some women finally realize that men can think about relationships with more than just their penis. And once many men reach the age of 30 or 35, we start to awaken from our testosterone-induced comas, and we start wanting more than good sex and possibly children in a relationship. And the majority of women are not prepared to deal with the consequences of a man that starts coming out of his shell, and they realize that he's a human being too. Ironically, this is also roughly when marriages run into trouble. In Canada, the average man gets married at the age of 31 and gets divorced around the age of 38 or 39, around the time that he has his midlife crisis or awakening. His mind begins to change, and I think the woman that he's always been with basically is used to running the show, and when he opens up his mouth at that point, he starts talking back to her and demanding things. And that's when she gets tired of it and leaves. With many women, it's often in their nature to often drop demands onto a man after 3 months, 6 months, or even after a year goes by in the relationship. Women assume that at that point the man is emotionally attached to them, so it's okay to start making demands of him. He's in love, so he'll basically work harder to please her because he doesn't want to feel the pain of breaking up. This, my friends, is emotional blackmail, and it's generally a deep-seated part of how women control men. They use our own love against us. And the way they generally measure love or observe it is by seeing how willing or unwilling we are to go along with their demands. And as we pass into the age where our big brain starts to think for us, once again we start to be less willing to tolerate their bullshit. And ironically, that's one of the main reasons I think women get divorced. For many women, it feels less scary to be on their own or with their children than living in a relationship with a man that has dramatically changed to become someone else. The funny thing is that men assume that women feel love the same way that we do. So when a man starts to awaken in his mid to late 30s, it must be incredibly scary for married women because they're basically used to dictating to a married man who he can hang out with and what's basically supposed to be happening in the relationship. And then suddenly he's no longer compliant and she doesn't know what to do. And at the same time, when she's in her 30s, most of the time she's having children and her biological clock has stopped ticking or is at least slowed down because she's gotten her 1 or 2 bundles of joy. So at that point she starts thinking that life should be fun once again when the kids go off to school. She gets a breather and yet her man is no longer under her spell. It's at this point when her kids are usually 6, 7, 8, or even 9 years of age and become independent, and her husband is in his late 30s and also becoming independent, and that scares most women. Just a few years earlier, the man was under her love spell, and the children were dependent on her for their very survival. And all of a sudden, she's no longer the center of attention, and she doesn't know how to handle it anymore. And instead of thinking her way through the changes in her life, she just knows that things feel off. And women generally feel first and think second, so her emotions are telling her that her husband is a threat, and that her children are growing up too quickly and something has to happen. And instead of trying to work on her communication skills with her husband, she decides to separate and divorce him instead of taking the time to work things out with him. He is now awake and aware of female nature, and he gets taken to the cleaners and has to pay alimony and child support. And the moment he realizes his self-actualization and freedom as a man, it gets snatched away from him. And then she most likely takes custody of the kids, and they are scared to basically lose their mother, because in a way they've just lost their father, so they become emotionally closer to their mother. That means she doesn't have to deal with the separation anxiety from her kids as much, because the kids are afraid, and they basically look to her guidance and support, and the man that she married is basically changed, and she doesn't want to be with him anymore. But he continues to send her a check every single month, so she feels like she still has some safety and security with regards to resources. It's a win-win situation. And the kids are generally more emotionally needy and thus cling to her and give her a sense of being needed. She has the financial security that she had before, and now she doesn't have to deal with the man. In most Western countries, she gets to keep the house and gets the money from the husband along with most of the custody of the kids. And she no longer has to deal with the man that's gone from being an easy-to-control thirsty mangina and is now free-thinking and questioning her judgment. And she's now free to find yet another thirsty man out there that's going to do her bidding. Perhaps a younger man in his 20s, or an older man that basically came out of a bad marriage that lasted for a really long time, and he has no idea about how female nature works. That's female nature, and the emotional state a woman is going through when she's contemplating divorce. On top of that, she gets tons of support from her family and friends when she goes through the process. And they all rush to her aid to support her in her time of need, as she throws the man out like last week's leftovers. No doubt she probably supported one of her friends during her divorce as well, and now the friend will do the same. They will cook together and probably talk about how bad their ex-husbands were, and how they don't need them anymore, while cashing in their ex-husband's checks at the same time. The man she was with before becomes nothing more than a series of digits in her bank account. She's traded his penis for pixels on a screen. That, my friends, is female nature. Anyways, thank you, Mike, for your donation. And as for everyone else out there in YouTube land, please follow me on Twitter or like me on Facebook to get tomorrow's video today. Thanks for taking your daily dose of red pills. And remember, a red pill a day keeps the divorce lawyers away. So enjoy the rest of your day, and cheers.